Hey, Kirk, welcome to the show. I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks, Lacey. I really appreciate it.
This is going to be fun for me. I'm going to try to stay on the rails here, but I could talk to you all day long. We've had a lot of discussions offline about business and money and life, so I'm very excited to have this conversation with you so everybody else can enjoy all the knowledge you have to share.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
I want to start with, because I want to know this too, is how did you go from being in the Coast Guard to working at Motley Fool to now be in financial planning with Bastion?
Yeah, so I always tell people I never would have thought I'd be a financial planner. Like, I just never would have believed it. So I went to the Coast Guard Academy, and I was actually a history and government major at the Coast Guard Academy. So I wasn't even a finance guy. So I wasn't one of these young guys that love stocks or anything like that. And what happened was when you're at the academies, I assume they probably still do this, but they get you a car loan as you head into your senior year. You can't have a car at the academies until your senior year. So they line up a really low rate, interest rate, with Bank of America, USAA, something like that. So in the mid 90s, we got a car loan for 1.5%, like 25,000 at 1.5%. Yeah, and back then, car loans were 7, 8, 9%. So it was a pretty good deal. You could have taken your money, put it in a checking account, and gotten a little bit of extra return because they were probably paying 2, 3% in interest. So I was fortunate. I had a 1965 Buick Skylark convertible that I bought from my aunt when I was a kid for like $1,500. That was my car when I was 16. I mowed yards as a kid and I was able to buy that car. It still was the greatest car I ever had. But she basically had the car, kept it in the garage. She never drove it. So when I got it in 1980, it only had like 20,000 miles on it because she never drove it because it didn't have power steering or power brakes. But anyway, so I basically got this 25,000, and I'm like, I don't really need the money, but I know it's smart to take it because it's such a low interest rate. But I didn't know what to do with it. And my folks didn't really know. They were both high school teachers. They didn't have really any savings. They didn't really know much about finance. They were working for a pension. So my dad introduced me to a friend of his who was a broker. And this friend used to be a teacher, left teaching, and became a broker. So, I mean, he was a family friend, and he was until the day he passed. And he basically took my money and sold me some insurance products, even though you get insurance really cheap through the military, SGLI. And he put me in some annuities. Yeah. I didn't know any better. I'm just like, all right, this guy's the expert. I got to do, what he's thinking. So, you get on the ship, you get busy with life. And I get my statements every month. And then basically, I wouldn't even look at them. I just file them away. And I figured, I'm basically doing everything I need to do. So I've saved a big chunk of money. And while I didn't have a lot of family that knew a lot about finance, my grandfather used to tell me, never spend more than you make and save 10% of your pay. So when I was out, my first tour was in Hawaii. I was on a 378-foot ship. So we were out to sea half the year. So I would come in after every patrol, and I'd have 3, 4 grand sitting in the bank. I wasn't spending anything out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So I just sent him this money. I just kept sending this guy money. And I was probably saving, way more than 10% of my pay. So then we get into the later 90s, and you might remember the tech stocks were doing great, those internet stocks, kind of like the AI stocks today. And I was like, well, what have I really made on my money? So I pulled out all those old statements, got out my calculator, pen and paper, and really figured out I was paying him as much in commissions as I was earning on the accounts. So that kind of opened up everything for me. So while I was still in active duty in the Coast Guard, I started studying for my certified financial planner designation. So I would just do that at night. And I just started consuming all kinds of financial information and just really found I enjoyed it. So when my 5 years were up with the Coast Guard, I decided to get out and thought I would go into financial planning. But I was stationed in Washington, D.C. at the time. I was living in Alexandria, and in Alexandria is where the headquarters of the Motley Fool is. So, if anybody watching this or listening to this, if they're familiar with finances at all, I probably have heard the Motley Fool. It's clearly a weird name, but the founders of the Fool came up with that name because they were actually both English majors. And in Shakespearean literature, the only one who could tell the king the truth is the fool. So their approach was, we're telling the truth, we're steering you away from Wall Street. We're going to give you the information so you can manage your own finances. You can do it yourself. It's not that hard. And so I got to know the brothers. And as I got out of the military, when I went on terminal leave, I did a bike ride from Seattle to DC. It was part of the American Lung Association would do this every year. So there's about 220 riders. It's about 40 days. And the Motley Fool sponsored me. They were my corporate sponsor.
Wow.
So you had to raise like $7,000. Back then it was like, how am I going to do that? But they basically paid for most of that. So I would call in from the road to the radio show that they had at the time. So every Saturday I'd call in, hey, I'm in Butte, Montana, or South Dakota, and just talk to them. So basically when that got all done, I applied for a job and I was working there. And my job there was, I was the head of their customer service, member services. So anytime the Fool actually interacted with a person, so they had some products they sold, so they had customer service, they had message boards. So any point where they would literally talk to people individually, I was in charge of that. And we would get all kinds of people that would write in and say, look, can you help me out? I'm not sure what to do with my money. And the Fool at that time was prohibited by the SEC of giving individual advice. Like we couldn't say, Lacey, you need to do Roth IRA. That's the first thing you should fund. But we could write an article why you should think about a Roth IRA. So I just knew all these people that were writing in, I don't have time to research all this. What should I do? I knew they were going to end up going down, the local brokerage and getting slammed to an insurance product or an annuity like I did. So after a couple of years of Motley Fool, I decided, well, you know what? I've worked on my CFP. I'm gonna actually do some financial planning. I'm gonna be a financial planner. I didn't want to work on commissions. Did not want to have to sell a product. So there's not a lot of firms out there that are truly completely free of commissions. And that was especially true. This was 2000. It was Fielding was still really new back then. There were, NAPFA, which is a organization of fielding financial planners. It was in existence. So I basically applied from Maryland all the way down to Florida at fielding firms. And, most of them are mom and pop shops. But I was lucky that one of the firms in the Tampa area was hiring because his son was leaving the firm to go pursue a dream of music industry up in Nashville. So he needed help. So it was just, luck. So I was down here, worked at a firm for 3 or 4 years. And then my wife wanted to move back to Maryland where she was from. So, rather than going into another firm, I was like, I'm just going to start my own firm. And I founded, it was called Picket Fence Financial. So I did that in 2006. And that was, we've talked about business, but that was really tough because I moved to an area where I really knew nobody. I was starting as ground level as you can start because financial planning is very much a relationship business. So I had to build all the relationships and try to make a living. So I did that for 19 years, and then this year I merged my firm in with a Coast Guard Academy classmate of mine, Cale Smith, who you interviewed a little while ago, and this is our first year as Bastion Fiduciary. So that's the long version of a short story for you.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. First of all, I'd never heard the story. I'm familiar with Motley Fool, but I didn't know that they were English majors. That makes a lot more sense. I knew what the Fool was, but like having, so that's really interesting. Also, too, that they sponsored you to do your ride. That's super cool.
Yeah.
But wonderful, like that you kind of carved your path after the Coast Guard, and I for my situation, like getting out of the military and like building business, what you're saying, relationships are so important, and it's a whole different world than being in the military. So I could see what you're saying, like getting out, going and starting someplace new, not only not knowing anyone, not having I don't know, people you go to church with or go golf with or whatever it is, you're starting over, and then also to trying to build your base.
Yeah. Yep.
Super cool. In the planning for this episode, we were talking, and the topic of the Millionaire Next Door, the book, was brought up. And I find this interesting because this book has been around, I think, since 1996.
Yep.
And it has like key principles. So for people who haven't read it, what's kind of the main message of that book? Or if there is, some principles that people should have?
Sure. Yeah. Talking about, I gave you my story, how I really knew nothing about finance, and then all of a sudden just started consuming everything. And this was one of the key books for me that really gave me a clear path of what I need to do, what practices do I need to undertake to make sure that I'm going to be financially successful. And I mean, it was a really big and popular book in the 90s and the early 2000s, and it's faded. It's still, occasionally you'll hear people talk about it, but it's definitely faded. But the best example I can give for the book is it was done by two PhDs who were in academics, and they just wanted to see, what's the average millionaire? How do you become a millionaire? And they wanted to try to figure out what would you need to do to become a millionaire. So they interviewed 10,000 millionaires. And before they actually did the interviews, they decided to hold an event to invite a lot of the millionaires. And they're thinking, it's got to be first class. These people are millionaires. They're the top, they're the echelon of the financial world in America. So they rented out, a big ballroom at the Hilton. They had wine and champagne and little caviar and all this stuff that they thought that a millionaire would want. So right before the event actually starts, a gentleman walks in. He's got a long beard. He's wearing overalls. They see him and they're like, "We got to get this guy out of here. We can't have the millionaires.
We can't have that riffraff in here."
Yeah. We can't have them seeing this guy. And they go up to him and they find out he's on the list. And the funny thing is, he goes and he looks at all the food that's there and the champagne, and he walks back up there and goes, "Could somebody just get me a beer? Can I just have a beer?" And the thing is, they found that was actually the people that showed up for this event. They weren't the people that drove up in a Mercedes-Benz convertible, with Gucci suits and all those things. It was your millionaire, your neighbor next door. So they really kind of laid out, 7 key traits that really made these people successful. First, it's pretty obvious: live below your means. I told you my grandfather said, never spend more than you make, save 10% of your pay. That's what these people would do. The other thing is, they were not motivated in any way by social status. Like, they did not care to have that Mercedes. They didn't worry about having a BMW. They didn't want the biggest house in the neighborhood. Most of these folks, they wanted financial independence instead of status. So what they found is most of these people lived in blue-collar neighborhoods or middle-class neighborhoods. Nothing extravagant. They drove, mid-level cars, usually bought used, and they drove them until they died. They would drive these cars if they could go 150,000 miles. That's how long they drove them. So it was all these things. They just live way below their means. They found that they're very good at allocating time and money. So a lot of the people that were millionaires, you think doctors, lawyers, dentists, and while there certainly is a percentage of those folks that get that way, that's really not the norm. Most of these people just had common jobs, or they were small business owners. A lot were small business owners. And that gets to the point where, they're using their money efficiently. And so the other big thing is, so on the business end, a lot of them understood the power of taxes. And, when you're a W-2 employee, you basically get whatever your employer offers for benefits. But when you're self-employed, there's a lot more you can do. Your dollar of income goes a lot further than somebody who's just a W-2 employee. So the Millionaire Next Door really knows and understands taxes. And the other thing is, they're willing to pay experts to help them. That's the other big thing. And I'm not trying to advocate, because I'm a financial planner, you should do that.
Yeah.
You don't need to have a financial planner. You just need to have some really good discipline.
I'm glad you said that because it's one of my questions coming up. So we'll circle back on that one.
Yeah, but these people would be smart about what they're doing with their money. They'd actually take time to understand it, to learn about it, and make things work. Another interesting thing about them, and this isn't so much a trait, but less than 50% of the people that were wealthy actually received any kind of inheritance whatsoever. So these were not people who inherited a lot of money, the millionaires. They built it up themselves. The other big thing that they found with a lot of these folks is their children were self-sufficient. So not only did they learn to use money well, but they taught their children to do the same. So they didn't have to worry about their kids, glumming onto them and trying to get money out of them. So yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is living below your means, putting your money to work, finding a career, and it doesn't have to be a doctor, lawyer, or anything like that. Just finding a good career, and then if you can do it, be a small business owner.
Yeah,
those really help. And and you spend a lot of time with business owners and advising them, so I mean, you probably have seen that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the book kind of, or we talked about that it's older, but when you were talking in the beginning there, I thought about it, and I interview a lot of military affiliated financial people, and that has to be, this book is one of the top recommended books. Whenever, episode, I ask everybody what their favorite book is right now, favorite book of all time. And that is one of the top. I don't know the exact statistic, but actually I'm probably going to upload into ChatGPT to run that data for me. But it is, and I could see how it resonates with the military community, because I see there are a lot of people in the military community that announcing their wealth is a security risk.
Yes.
So sometimes I see a lot of, especially the world that I'm in, a lot of people that announce their wealth online. I mean, some people put their net worth statements online, and the military in me is like, that's an absolute, security risk, not only for yourself, but for your family, especially if you're getting into big numbers. Like, then it's like, okay, now the whole world knows that, what you have. But I feel like I've met, I know a lot of millionaires. I mean, not a lot, but I know some millionaires. And I remember one time I was out with some people and I couldn't believe the audacity, but somebody at the table asked this gentleman, "Are you rich?" Just straight up asked him outright. And I'll never forget his response, because I thought, I mean, it just sums up like why he's a millionaire. But it was, "I'm comfortable." And that was, not like he didn't need to flex up. Yes, I'm rich, It was, "I'm comfortable." Because I could see too, is like when you've worked hard for everything that you have, it's like, you could lose it. Like, it was really hard to get there. And so, you never want to get too big for your britches. But a lot of people that, true, like you said, are the millionaire next door, they don't want people to know they're a millionaire.
Exactly. And that was the thing. Like, the millionaire is probably your neighbor, and you just don't know it. And it's tough to do that. And what they said is they crave financial independence. I'm comfortable. That's the phrase that you probably use. And that's hard for people because it's not tangible. Right, you're putting money away, whereas if you go and you buy something really cool, a Gucci bag, the new golf clubs, whatever it might be, you can hold on to that. You get a little dopamine hit. You don't really get that dopamine hit if you're going to put the money into a mutual fund or an ETF. It just doesn't happen. So, and in fact, really, the only time people get dopamine hits with investing, it's when they're trying to make huge gains, and that usually blows up in their face at some point. Yeah, even on the investing side, the dopamine hit's not what you want. But I always say the military is like the perfect profession to be that millionaire next door. You just have to get disciplined about saving every single month and making sure you make that a priority. The last job I had in DC, my boss was at 06, and his approach was he never. Every time he got a promotion, his living standards stayed at the previous rank. So, when he's an ensign, okay, he saved a little bit. But then when he made JG, he kept living off his ensign, what would have been ensign pay. And he took the JG pay boost, and saved it. And then when he made lieutenant, he lived as a JG and so on and so forth. So as he went up the ranks, he basically, one, it kept him from increasing his lifestyle. His income went up. And then two, he was socking away a ton of money. So, when he retired, he didn't have to worry about anything.
Yeah.
He had that financial independence, especially with the military pension too.
Yes. No, if you have a good leader too, leadership goes into a lot of things, but in the military, if you have a really good leader obviously not trying to give financial planning advice. I think those people are red flag, they're the barracks or the company financial planner unofficially but like your boss giving solid advice, like, hey, he's not telling you what to do, but here's a concept, or some type of strategy that you can follow to help you improve. My dad always taught us, and I actually coach this now, is, hey, every time that you get a pay raise, split the difference. If you round number, you get $100 more, take $50 and increase your quality of life, but the other 50 goes to increase your savings. So like you're working on both fronts, and it's not like dumping it all into lifestyle, because I think that's where a lot of people go wrong, is the lifestyle. I think it's addressed in this book, right? That's a lot of it is your lifestyle.
Exactly. Yep. So these folks that end up amassing $1 million, they basically live in the same house for a long extended period. Now, I know military folks are moving around a lot, but basically, they're not looking at the big new McMansions down the road and wanting to buy those. They're driving their cars till they die. Even as their income went up, they didn't change kind of how they live, and that's the key. So
yes, for kind of switching gears into which we mentioned earlier, that for financial planning, I think this is a big distinction that people struggle with, and so I want your help articulating it. Is what is the difference between your daily money habits and true financial planning, and things you can do on your own, and then where you might want some help, and where you would be at when you would need that? Like, is it a certain threshold with your net worth, something like that?
So it's interesting. So the daily money habits are the key. I mean, they're the building block. If you think of a pyramid, that's the base. Being in financial planning, I've seen people who have had the worst advisors, annuities, insurances, speculative stocks that blew up, all kinds of things. And most of the time, these people are still okay because their lifestyle, their daily habit was to save, to live below their means, to not spend excessively, to not make the spur of the moment purchase, that kind of stuff. So they had their daily habits in place, and despite getting bad advice, they still are in a really good spot, because they're also using the power of compounding over time. So maybe it wasn't compounding as quickly as it could have, but it's still compounding and they're saving. So I think that's probably the biggest thing is, if you can do your daily habits, you're going to get there. That's the key. If you can live below your means and make sure you're saving, you're probably going to get there. Now, as to when you should get advice, well, I think a lot of it comes down to what's your natural personality. Are you interested in learning about this stuff or reading about it? And you don't have to become an expert. I mean, really, if you get a rudimentary understanding of asset allocation, and okay, I could buy a Vanguard total stock market fund. I put X amount into the Vanguard total international fund, and then amount in bonds. And you save over the long term, keeping your costs down, you're going to be fine. So you don't have to have a massive amount of understanding. But there are times, I think, when you would need help is when you're in that position and you don't either want to understand what's going on, or you don't have the time to do it, or you just don't really. It's a complicated thing, like estate planning and then taxes. I've especially seen this on the military side with taxes, because I had a tax office up in an area with a lot of military. Just to give you a quick example, one of them was, she was in 06, she had some rental properties. As she went through her career, she'd buy a place and keep it, but she didn't want to pay a tax preparer. She thought she could do it herself. And then on a rental property, she didn't take depreciation on the rental property because she didn't understand it. So she's like, well, if I don't take depreciation, I don't have to worry about depreciation recapture. And I know I'm getting a little nuanced here.
But a lot of military people listening have been through this situation because of their rental properties.
Yeah, so she just tried to avoid it figuring, well, if I don't address it in my tax return, I won't have to do it when I sell the property. But that's not the law. The IRS assumes you're taking depreciation every year you have the rental. So when you sell, they want to recapture whether you took it or not. So she's at an 06 level. She'd been buying places since she was a junior officer. So she had missed out on massive amounts of tax write-offs. And she was going to have to pay the tax at the end anyway. Whereas if she'd have hired somebody who was competent with tax preparation, she would have avoided that mistake. So I tell people, if you feel like you really don't understand what's going on, it's good to get help. And like I mentioned to you, the Millionaire Next Door, those people would hire folks to get good advice. They knew the power of doing that it was going to pay a dividend down the road for them. So, especially on things like taxes and estate planning, if you really don't dig in and learn something about it, you probably need to hire a professional.
Yeah, and it's usually cheaper in the long run.
Absolutely. Way cheaper. Yeah.
I want to ask this question because it's common for people that have debt, but also know they need to be saving for their retirement. How should people balance paying off debt, saving their money, investing in things like the TSP or a 401k or for military spouses, an IRA, especially when they're still early in their careers?
Yeah, so the biggest thing would be, well, I tell people in general, like if you're getting a match, so if you get a match in a 401k, that's one time you want to not pay down debt quickly in order to save, because that's free money. If you're getting the 3% match, you put 3% in, they give you 3%, that's 100% return. You're not going to get that anywhere else. So if they have a match, we definitely want to do that. Now, if they don't have a match, if they have a lot of debt, we try to attack that as fast as we can. Because I say, you want to use the rule of compounding to your advantage. And that compounding is working against you when you have debt. So if you get rid of that debt, you are putting the power of compounding to your favor. So a lot of times, I'm not necessarily totally a Dave Ramsey guy, but if you have a credit card debt, that's where you want to focus on paying that down as fast as you can. So maybe you don't do the Roth, you don't do the 401k, TSP, you just attack that debt with reckless abandonment. You just go and get that done. And then at that point, then you've got the cash flow to start putting it into savings. That is usually how I'll do it if it's credit card debt. Now, auto loans, if you get a 4-year loan, if you can pay it off in 4 years, I'm okay keeping that debt and then saving in the TSP or Roth IRA. So I'm not as worried about paying off auto loans as compared to like credit card debt. And then mortgages, if you really get into the number, you're better off not paying your mortgage faster. That's strictly the number standpoint. Now, I know there's people who just don't want any debt and they want to pay that mortgage off. That's a different story, and maybe in some instances it's a good idea to pay the mortgage off. But for the most part, you want to use the leverage of that mortgage debt in that you save into TSPs, Roths, where the money's going to compound, because your mortgage doesn't compound, it's amortized. Like the day you buy that house, how much you're going to pay in interest to the penny. So you don't have to worry that the amount that you owe goes up because it's compounding. That doesn't happen with a mortgage or an auto loan, but it does with credit cards. So that's why I'm like, get rid of the credit cards, use that power of compounding to your advantage. But for auto loans and mortgages, kind of let them, just pay them down over time and then take the money and get that power of compounding into a Roth, into a TSP. So I think you'll be better off financially if you do it that way.
I love those answers. It's really about like focusing and getting something under control, and great distinctions about credit card debt, mortgage versus, car loan. But I think people just really do underestimate the power if they focus. I always think of paying down, especially credit card debt, the power of a magnifying glass. If you put that sucker, in the sunlight and put it on something, it's going to catch it on fire. And if you really are focused, you will catch on fire, or get rid of the debt, burn that up, but because you are putting your energy into something and really paying attention to it. That's like if you want to, drop 5 pounds, if you're really paying attention to what you're eating, you're going to drop those 5 pounds.
Exactly. Yeah, you're totally right. What gets the things you focus on get managed, they get taken care of. That's the key.
The military community moves so frequently. What's your advice for a young service member, their family, military spouses, how they can plan with uncertainty in their life? Not knowing, am I getting promoted? Are we PCSing this summer? Are we going to stay in? Are we going to get out? All of these things that they are up against when it comes to planning their money, not to mention military spouses. Will I be employed at this duty location? Will I be making what I had made previously, or, what my education and experience would normally get?
Yeah, that's where, getting to the point, you don't want to have debt. You don't want to have something that's going to bog you down if you have an unexpected exit from the military, or a spouse can't find a paying job in the new location. So that's where having the credit card debt, the consumer debt, if you don't have that, it allows you don't have to have as much cash flow coming in. The last thing you want is where no matter what, you've got some payments you have to make every month. So get rid of the consumer debt. And then really for military families, although the government is seen as a pretty reliable employment, of course, people right now with the shutdown might argue differently, but you do want to have some emergency savings once you pay off your credit card debt. So you want to make sure you've got at least 3 months of cash on hand, so that if you have an exit from the military, you've got a little bit of time before you have to find that paying job to make ends meet for the family. So those are kind of the two biggest things that you'd want to do. You want to just make sure you're going to have enough headaches and stress with all the qualitative things of life. Are we going to get out? Are we going to stay in? Where are we going to live? You don't want a financial issue to also end up being a stressor. What about the credit cards? What do we, how do we pay off all these auto loans? That's a stress you don't want to have. It just complicates a stressful situation even more.
Thinking about the book, and for people listening that are like, I'm going to do something today, I'm going to change one small habit. From the book, what is one that you would recommend if people are going to tackle or take on one that they should do?
Well, the biggest thing that you always have to start with knowing where your money's going. And that was one of the things in the book too, is these people, maybe they didn't keep budgets to the penny, but they knew where every dollar was going. And so if you're struggling financially, the first thing you have to do is assess, why am I struggling, and understand where this money is going. And once you start to see where the money's going, you can maybe stop a few of the outflows that maybe are unnecessary. Maybe subscriptions, maybe it's refinancing a debt, things like that. You can start to make a little inroads, find that low-hanging fruit and pick that first. And then once you understand your situation, then you can start to make bigger moves and then get your budget under control. Once you get your budget under control, like I said, as long as you're committed to saving, even if you're in bad investments or anything like that, but if you're saving through your life consistently, things are going to work out for you. They may not be completely optimized, but they're going to work out.
Yeah, I think the small stuff really just adds up, and people don't give it as much credit as it should have, as these little things pile on once they kind of get going and snowballing.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, I want to switch gears and ask you a couple of quick random questions I ask everyone. First off, what is one resource or tool that you use that makes your life or work easier?
Wow, man, there's so many of them. I think the biggest one for me is Trello. I use Trello for everything, so I know exactly where I'm at with every project, with every plan. I put in long-term goals in there and I can track them. So I use that one a ton, and I think that's probably my biggest productivity enhancer.
Good one. Okay, what is your favorite book right now, or your favorite book of all time?
Well, right now I'm actually, being a history major, I still love to read that stuff. And I'm reading kind of a trilogy by Richard Evans. He's a historian. And it's basically looking at the rise of Nazi Germany to where the second book is on them in power before the war. And the third is on war itself. And I'm just about finished with the first book, The Rise of the Nazi Party. I mean, it's just fascinating when you get into it. And really, unfortunately, I think there's some parallels to what we see today a little bit. Just in general with the chaos that's happening, that basically the Nazis took advantage of chaos.
Yeah.
And we definitely live in more chaotic times than any time I've ever lived.
Yeah. I have found that history just repeats itself
It
a lot of times.
It does.
So.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I will be sure to put links to that in the show notes for everybody. Now it is time for my favorite part of the podcast, which is game time. And today, in honor of your visit, we are going to be playing Fact or Fiction. So I'm going to give you some statements from an old cranium game that I have. And you have to tell me if it is a fact or it's fiction. If you get 3 out of the 5 correct, you get bragging rights that you won game time on the MILMO show, which is a really big deal. I mean, I don't want to bring it up, but Kale did win. I don't want to add pressure. All right. Number 1. There are 8 bytes in 1 bit. Is that fact or fiction? You got a 50-50 shot here, Kirk.
I think that's fiction. I think it's 64.
No, it is. It's true.
Okay.
It says the 256 unique combinations of 8 on-off bits is 1 byte are often used to encode common letters. It might as well be Greek to me.
Yeah. Okay. That
Okay.
makes sense.
All right, number 2. A recently discovered woolly mammoth carcass, and I would like to give a disclaimer here. This I mentioned is an old cranium game, so I would not count on recently discovered here. So discovered woolly mammoth carcass frozen for more than 20,000 years gives scientists the DNA samples needed to clone the extinct Ice Age mammal of a woolly mammoth.
I think that's true. That's fact.
It's actually false, Kirk. I'm really sorry, but it says
Really?
it says
Man.
the repeated freezing and thawing of over the ages damages the DNA. Only pristine DNA can be used for So that is true then. I'm going to give you that one because if it was not like frozen, refrozen, you could clone. So I'm going to give you that one. So, okay, you got one.
You have to be flash frozen. Like it has to happen immediately.
Yes. Okay. Number 3, humans spend most of a good night's sleep in the rapid eye movement or REM state. Is that fact or fiction?
That's fiction.
Most of the night.
That's fiction.
That is correct. It says REM accounts for about 20% of a night's sleep, although newborns spend up to 50% of their sleep in REM sleep. So fun fact there. Okay, so you got 1 wrong, 2 correct. You got 2 more shots at winning here, Kirk.
All right.
Okay. Number 4, half pipe, slope style, and border cross are freestyle skateboarding events. Is that fact or fiction? So again, that's half pipe, slope style, and border cross.
I think that's snowboarding. So I'm going to say fiction.
That's correct. You're right. It is snowboarding.
Okay. I'm not a snowboarder, so.
You're like, I just want to make clear.
Yeah, but I thought that's what it was, so.
I would like to say I do snowboard, but I'm not a snowboarder. I spend more time rolling around in the snow than I do boarding.
It's like that joke like skiers always say is like, how does a snowboard introduce himself to you? And the answer is, sorry, dude.
Yes. Okay, so you have bragging rights, but you have to finish strong here. So last one. In the game of Scrabble, an F is worth 3 points. Is that fact or fiction?
You know, I've never played Scrabble, ever.
What?
Ever.
I would say this is one of my favorite board games.
So I'm gonna say fiction.
That is correct. It's worth 4 points. And as somebody that plays Scrabble, I did not know that. So you did really awesome. You definitely have bragging rights. You can let Kale know. You also won game time on the MILMO show.
Awesome.
Can you tell everybody listening where they can learn more about you and the work you're doing?
Yeah, so I've got a kind of a personal finance blog. It's called savingyourselffromwallstreet.com. So they can get podcasts, videos, and articles there. But also at Bastion Fiduciary, we've got a ton of information there because it's not just my work, but we've got 3 portfolio managers and another financial planner all adding to it. So there's a lot of information there. So I would go to lastbastion.com and sign up for our newsletters.
Wonderful. I'll be sure to link to all of that in the show notes for everybody. Thank you again, Kirk. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Lacey. This has been a pleasure.